Hey guys, welcome back to the shack. I've got another machine review. I've been trying to back down on these things, but this machine came from a company that this is my third machine that I've tried of theirs, and it had some features that I really wanted to try out and see how it worked. And this company also is kind of like myself, and they take work area very seriously. So if you want to see what the machine is, and yes guys, it is actually running right here beside me. I'm going to lean over near it. It's doing a test burn right now for engraving, and that's as loud as it is. So if you want to know what the machine is, stick around. We'll be right back. I don't know if you can hear that little beep, 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 beep. That is the laser interacting with the material. That's the loudest thing about this guy. I am currently doing an engrave test with the machine, but while it finishes that, guys, we're going to go back through and we're going to work on going through the installation and how it goes together, assembly and all that stuff. But I will tell you, this is the new Neje Max 4. You'll recognize it from most all other lasers because it is this nice, like, green color. It's the only machine on the market that I've seen that has the green color. I've had the Neje 3 Max. I also had a Neje Laser Master, I think it was called. It was a little three-legged machine that was a pretty good machine, but it was not the square form factor. The Neje 3 Max that I had was the older version. This one has some upgrades since then, and the work area is a little smaller, I think, on this one than it is the new version 2 of the Neje 3 Max. But guys, this thing has some things that other machines don't, such as an actual usable, non-irritating Z-axis. This is probably one of the best user-friendly Z-axis that I've run across so far. So stick around. I'm going to kind of walk you through the setup process. We're going to touch on that, and we're going to go over some other things and get into a little more details. But I'm going to be letting this guy finish this burn. All right, guys. So as far as assembly goes on this machine, this is not one of the bring it out of the box and get to engraving type machines. It does require a certain level of assembly skills. They do provide you all the parts needed, all the tools needed. It's very basic. It's not all that complicated. As you can see, all of the electronics are housed on the gantry, but there are some parts that have to be added to it. The instruction book is not awesome. It does show you the steps, but I highly recommend if you're going to get this machine and put it together that just watch yourself some YouTube videos on the assembly. I'm not going to go in depth on the assembly. There's lots of good assembly videos out there where they walk you through every step. I will tell you the tensioners, you can see I put the tensioners on the front of the machine there. Those are decent tensioners. I like the way they operate, but as my friend Steve over at Ventari's Workshop stated with the new Neje V2 Max, they're not real useful if you mount this thing to a spoil board because you have to access them through the bottom. You could drill holes in the bottom of your spoil board directly underneath those and still use them, but that's a little bit of a hassle to go through. I stick with just tensioning them from the back. I did add the tensioners because I wanted to go ahead and put them on there, but the way that I did it is I just tensioned them as I would with any other machine from the back right there, just hand tensioned them and went with that. The belts, putting the belts on, not all that hard. You may want to invest in a small pair of needle nose pliers. If you don't have those, make sure you get some tweezers. And you're going to need a range of different Allen wrenches, which they provide, but I have my trusty little tools that I like to use. But basically, the four pieces of the frame goes together. The tensioners go on the front. I guess you could probably put them on the back if you wanted, but I preferred to put them on the front because they're aluminum and they do add a little something to the design and the look. There's a cat, by the way. But all in all, not a terrible assembly. It did take a little while. You have to basically disassemble those tensioners to put them on there and then put them back together with the cable on there. It's a bit of a process, so you may want to just skip those all together like Steve did, but I went ahead and put them on there just so that, I can say I did. The cable management, considering that all the electronics are on the gantry, it's really not bad. This little tray right here goes on there. It runs from one side to the other. They've got the holes drilled in the gantry already tapped, ready to go. You just got a few screws to put in there. This machine also, you can see at the top of the screen there, it does come with 2 drag chains, one for the gantry and the other to go beside the machine. Now, the catchy is in order to use that drag chain, guys, you're going to have to secure one end of it to something. And you'll see later on in the assembly here, I wind up going with a piece of 1/2-inch MDF as a bit of a spoil board, and just to add something to the bottom of this thing to connect that hardware to. It also gives you a place that you can mount the end of the drag chain and keep all your cable management the way it's supposed to be. Now, personally, with this machine, that's me taking pictures, because you have to take the cable loose from the controller in order to put everything through this drag chain. And if you don't tape these guys up, it's a little more aggravating. So tape those guys up so that they don't get hung, and it makes it relatively easy to just shove those through that drag chain. It's a little tricky right there. You got to come in with the screws from the bottom to keep the screws from rubbing against the wires, and then put the nuts on the top. I just used a pair of pliers to tighten down the nuts. And then once you get everything secured to this little tray, you have to reconnect the cabling back to the controller. So that's what I took pictures of. I wanted to make sure I put everything back where it went, and so when before I unplugged them, I took a picture. And you'll probably notice in here that before I put them back together, I'm going to reference that photo. This little bracket is a little tricky. You got to orient it correctly, because that cable comes through that little bracket and connects to the machine. Once you get it oriented properly, everything will make sense, and then you can put the screws in it and continue. And there I am referencing my photo to make sure that I plug everything into its appropriate hole. It was pretty self-explanatory, but a photo, guys, that there's no second guessing yourself when it's a photo, and you don't want to burn up any sensitive electronics because you plugged into the wrong port. So this takes a few minutes to get done, but once you get that done, it's very clean as far as the wiring. You've got this second drag chain that connects to that piece that we just attached. I'm going to go ahead and run everything through it, and I've got like a little grabber that I use to reach in there and pull that hose through. You've got to get the USB, the power, and the air line through that guy, and that can be a little challenging if you don't have the appropriate tools. Some drag chains you can snap them open and lay it in there and close it back. This one was a fixed drag chain, so you got to come in from one end and out through the other. But pretty much the rest of it is just going to be cable management. All of the major pieces are on there now, so we'll just kind of skip through this part and continue on towards the end of what I did. All right, guys, so finishing up on the cable management with the module. Had to add the air assist cone to it, and just kind of getting everything cleaned up and tidied the way I like it. Once I got it set up, I went and grabbed my piece of MDF, which just coincidentally, guys, I had this piece in the shop, and it just happened to be about the right size. So I left it the width it was, because it was a little over 24 inches, and just had to trim some off the end. And basically, I'm going to attach the machine to it so that I can connect that drag chain, and it'll also give me a little bit of a reference board for if I'm doing engraving with the machine and don't need a honeycomb, then I'm going to cut me some zigs in there, some lines in there to use for reference marks, and also do some pretty cool logo design on it. But that's all I'm doing here is basically just attaching the machine, making sure everything's square, and attaching it to that spoil board. All right, guys, everything's attached. I got the drag chain connected there with a couple of little small screws. Got everything plugged in. Now over to Lightburn to do the final installation of the machine, make sure we got everything correct, and see if this guy works. So, of course, going to devices, search for devices. I'm just going to let it auto try to locate it just to see, does everything connect the way it should? Does it find the machine? A lot of guys ask me, you have problems with them connected. But as you can see, it found the machine, not a problem. Found it on COM port. Neje 4 Max is what I'm naming it. I'm going to move through. The only thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the auto home, because I don't like that function. I prefer not to use it. If you have a habit of not homing your machine, then you may want to use it. But got to put it on COM 5, I think it was, that it found it on. And you can see that when you connect to the machine, it's going to tell you it found the Neje. Hit the home button just to make sure everything works the way it's supposed to. And guess what, guys? It worked. It homes really well. Just doing some final checks, make sure all my cabling is moving with the machine as it should. That drag chain was a little tight because the cable in there is kind of thick, so it was kind of holding things off. Just checking the module. Now I've got to figure out how to work this Z-axis because it's got a cool Z-axis. All right, guys, so one of the first things I like to do with the machine is confirm my actual working area. And I did find that depending on how low you go with your focus on this machine, the fans on the module can strike the front of the frame if you try to go out too far. What I did to safeguard that is basically, you can see the module's actually past the frame of the machine there. If the object is large enough that you don't have to bring the module down to the top of the frame, that's fine. I did run into some trouble later where I found out that the machine was hidden. So I'm going to enable the laser. I'm going to go ahead and set my return to location. These are things that I do on every machine before I even start trying to use it. Setting my return to location to the back left corner, going in here, and just making that basically just framing that to make sure that the machine freely moves in the work area that I have set. And like I said, later on I ran into trouble and had to back the front of the work area back just a little bit because the cooling fans were actually striking that angle iron on the front there because the module, when it comes down to focus on my spool board, it was hitting. Now, if I'd had a honeycomb in there, that would not have been a problem. But something you may want to consider when you're setting your machine up is if you're not going to be using a honeycomb all the time, you may want to restrict the work area. Now, the next step that I'm doing here is basically I'm going in, creating a folder, and I'm dumping the settings for this machine from the controller before I start messing with it or in case something goes south. Basically, I'm backing up the controller settings into a little file called stock settings for the Neje 4 Max. Once I back those up, I'm going to go through here just making sure that the speeds and everything look like they should. This machine has some pretty fast speeds. You can see there. So everything looked good. I didn't see any problems, anything that's going to hinder me. All right, guys, so this part is basically I'm going in and I'm setting the 0 for the Z-axis. You're going to do this in your macro buttons. You'll go in and edit the button. I may do a Z-axis video on this machine, so I'm not going to go too in-depth with this machine, but I will tell you the way that it works. It has a limit switch at the top, so when you hit this home button or when you home the machine, it goes up to the top, finds the very highest point of the Z-axis, and sets that as 0. From that point, it's got 45 millimeters range of motion downward. And so basically at 44 millimeters, my machine is set to be focused on the spool board. So all I got to do is subtract the thickness of whatever's on top of the spool board, and voila, there's my focus. Requires a little math, but guys, I'm really digging this Z-axis so far. All right, guys, so I've done a little bit of testing with the machine. I spent a lot more time playing with the Z-axis than I probably should have. But here's the cut results that I've got. And as you can see, with the surface focus of the machine, and what I did to find that out is basically I lowered and raised the machine. I set the focus all the way to the bottom, which is about 44 millimeters is where I set mine, just to leave me 1 millimeter space so it doesn't bottom out and start losing steps or cause a problem with that. But what I did is I lowered it all the way down, and then I loosened the module, lowered it down to the surface of my spool board, put my glasses on. The laser actually stays on when the machine's powered up really, really faintly. And so what I did is I lowered it down until I got the finest dot on the surface of that material that I could get. And then I tightened down those 2 thumb screws on the side. Once I did that, I know that at 44 millimeters on my Z-axis, this machine is focused to the surface of the spool board. So guys, focusing the machine is really simple at this point. So no matter what it is that I put on the surface of the work area, I can now take my caliper and use the little pin on the bottom of it right here to basically measure the distance from the surface of the material to the top of the spool board. And then I take that number and subtract that from 44. Whatever that remaining number is going to be the top of the material that I'm engraving. So if I've got a piece of material that's 10 millimeters thick and I just lay it on top of my spool board and I want to engrave it. Instead of actually having to go over and focus the machine, loosen the knobs, drop it down, no kickstand or anything like that, instead of having to do any of that, all I've got to do is measure the thickness of that material before I throw it on the spool board. If it comes out to be 10 millimeters thick, then I take 44 millimeters, which is focused where I come down to be focused on the surface of my spool board. Take that 44, subtract 10, 34 millimeters. So when I set the layer in light burn, if I'm doing an engrave and I want to do it focused to the surface, then I would set that layer at 34 millimeters. And there's no questions, there's no guesses, there's no nothing. It's gonna be focused because that's just the way it works, because it's just removing the thickness of the material from your furthest focus down to the spool board. If I'm doing a piece of material that's 3 millimeters thick, then I would just set my Z-axis to 41 millimeters and it would be perfectly focused. So it takes the guesswork out of it. I've got multiple machines that have Z-axes. I'm really digging the way this one works. And you're asking, well, what if you need a honeycomb and you put a honeycomb down and you're going to do some cutting? Same thing, guys. All you got to do is take your material and the honeycomb, use the pin on the bottom of your caliper here, and kind of just measure it. I did earlier when I was doing these speed tests and power tests. It worked out that by the time I subtracted the thickness of my material and the honeycomb, with the material laying on the honeycomb, I wound up with a focal point of 14.4. And that's what I run these. This is surface focus, 14.4. And I run these two tests. Well, I'm getting clean cuts at 100% up to 10 millimeters a second with a 20 watt. And that's not having to tweak with it. That's not dropping the focus or anything like that. That's really good for a 20 watt module. This E80 module, Steve over at Ventari's Workshop had told me when he reviewed the new Neje 3 Max Pro or Pro version 2, he told me that this was a pretty hot little module, and he was right. And if you want to see the other Neje, if you want options, I'll try to remember to drop a link down below to Steve's video on the Neje 3. It's going to be the predecessor to this machine, but a lot of the things are the same. The only thing Steve didn't get, I'm sorry Steve, is the Z-axis. But I will say, guys, this is probably one of the more user-friendly Z-axes I have seen. There's not an issue with, you know, having to hit the home button to set the Z-axis and then the machine forgetting where it's at and hitting the wall. None of that. This thing operates basically as just like a CNC would. And Neje even says that if you use G-code intended for a CNC, or if you use a CNC software, that this machine can actually change the Z-axis in flight, just like a CNC does. Haven't tested that? Probably going to, because I want to know. Also, guys, this thing comes with a pen that you can do like a plotter to draw things with the machine, as well as you can get a cutter to go with it for cutting vinyl and some of the sticker materials and stuff like that. That's pretty cool. Something I'll probably not use, but it's pretty cool. But the Z-axis, guys, is simple. So I ran the 14.4. It did a really good job. But if I wanted to drop the Z-axis down or raise it up, all I got to do is change that number that I input. So instead of 14.4, if I wanted to raise the focus 2 millimeters, or 2.4 millimeters, I would set it to 12 on the Z-axis. And as you can see, with 12 on the Z-axis, I didn't get the cutting that I did at 14.4 because I've raised my focus and it's going to lose focus before it penetrates the material. So I went the other way and I run it at 16.2. All right, so that gave me a little bit more of a penetrating focus, which made it cut a little better than it did with the surface focus. So guys, this machine, Z-axis wise, I will say I'm digging the way they got this one set up. When you home the machine, just like a CNC, the head raises, it hits the limit switch, stops, and it goes back to the home position. One setting that I did have to change in there is like when it goes from one layer to the next, I just basically told it to maximize the Z moves so that if the Z-axis height on one layer is the same as the other, instead of returning all the way to the top and coming back down, it just stays where it's at. So I'm still playing with it, guys. I got a lot more reviewing to do, a lot more testing to do. I want to try this thing on some bamboo cutting boards because as you can see from the engraving, it does a really good job of engraving. The only letdown that I had with this machine is that the Neje 3 Max that I had came with the automatic air assist M8 relay. This machine didn't. I have an M8 relay, but I'm not going to be using it just yet, and I have a couple more relays coming. So I can put one on there. I have confirmed it has the M7 port as well as the M8 port. I just need to add the relay to it. So it is very customizable. So far, it's doing a really good job. And like I said, it's probably one of the better Z-axis setups I've seen. It's very, very simple, but guys, let's face it, simple is good when it comes to these things. So far, so good, guys. Ruggedness, you know, the machine standalone, as big as it is, without being on the MDF, it's a little flimsy. These machines are intended to be mounted in an enclosure or built to a spoil board. To me, that's a no-brainer. A piece of MDF and got it bolted to it with a few little 3/4 inch screws or 1/2 inch screws, holds it together, works really well. And you know I like to hang my machines up, so I even cut myself a little circular handle on this end of the spoil board so that I can hang it on the wall when it's not in use. Because this machine is going to be really, really good for doing large engraves and so forth. The only downside I have is either I've got to remove my machine from EnclosureZilla or run it out here on the table. So still pondering on what to do with that. The 20 watt, I don't think it's going to make me want to pull my 35 watt out of the enclosure. But for engraving, guys, this is a really, really good machine. And if I had room, I probably would build another enclosure specifically for this machine. But real estate is at a premium. So, but all in all, guys, solid machine. I didn't expect anything less from Neje. They're a little bit more of a DIY type machine as far as like being able to tweak it and bells and whistles and stuff. But I will say they've kind of taken the cake with the Z-axis and the way that it works. Now, before any of you ask, this machine does have a linear rail on the gantry, but the sides, as you saw in the installation video or the assembly video, the side is still belt driven. The shorter, it's got 2040 extrusions on it. The shorter extrusions being 2040, they're really rugged, they're strong. It has a total of 4 wheels instead of the traditional 3. It's got 2 up top, 2 down at the bottom. The only ball drop that I have found on that is in order to adjust the eccentric wheels, I will have to remove it from my spoil board because they're under the bottom and you just can't get to them from the top. Or if you can, I haven't figured it out. But other than that, you know, any kind of maintenance, looks like I'm about to take it off the spoil board to do it because both the belt tensioners, if I just choose to use them, as well as the eccentric nuts under the bottom. The build quality I like. It is quiet. I mean, if noise is a problem for you guys, it's quiet. I mean, you heard it in the video. It's very, very quiet. The laser interacting with the material makes more noise than the machine does. So that's pretty awesome. It does have, and I'm going to turn it around here where you can see it a little better. It does have these 2 large cooling fans on the front of the machine. And the only problem that I had with the machine in the beginning, I'm going to have to power it down to get it to unlock. And that's one thing I will say about this machine. It doesn't have an off and on switch. If it's plugged in, it's working, guys. So if you're not using it and you're worried about leaving it running, then you're just going to have to unplug it. The only thing is you cannot move it when the steppers are locked in, so you have to power it down. But the only problem that I did run into, as I said, with it fully toward the front here, if you lower the gantry down and you don't have a honeycomb, the cooling fan will rub the top of the angle iron here at the bottom. But as long as you don't have to go that deep with the focus, that won't be an issue. But that's about it, guys. Like I said, look forward to more videos of the machine. It's doing a really great job, and I hope this gives you a little more information about it. I'm still working on getting my drag chain trained here. It's still wanting to kind of, you know, stick up a little more than it needs to. But I think as I run it, everything will break in. So we're going to keep playing with this machine and let you know what's going on with it later. All right, guys. So thanks to Neje for sending the machine out. I do like it. I do like some of the improvements. We still got a little room we can improve on the machine with, as far as you could have gave me the relay. But other than that, guys, $12 relay for the automatic air assist to add on to it. And it has all the capabilities of the other machines. And this, like I said, this is a very usable Z-axis. I'll try to do a more in-depth video on the Z-axis and how it works. Maybe have a little video of it in action. May even test that whole CNC thing to see if I can make it move while it's burning. And just see how that goes. But I hope the video was helpful. I hope you enjoyed it. I didn't want to make it too long, but I wanted to cover everything, cover all the bases, introduce you guys to the machine. I do plan on using it more in the shop. I've got some jobs coming up that it'd be well suited for. The only downside is I don't have it in an enclosure, so we're gonna have to vent the fumes out the door. But luckily it's cooling off for that. So until next time, guys, be safe and have a good day.